If you have ever driven through a quiet American highway late at night and felt an unexplainable urge to speed past certain places without looking back, then you already understand why the McDonald's on Route 17 in the small town of Ravenwood, Ohio, made so many people uncomfortable. The restaurant had been there for over 20 years, sitting alone near a gas station in a half-abandoned motel, glowing like a yellow warning sign in the darkness, open 24 hours a day as if sleep itself was not allowed near it. During daylight, it was nothing special. Families came in for happy meals, teenagers hung around after school, and travelers stopped for coffee. But after midnight, something changed in a way that no renovation or new manager ever fixed. Locals avoided it after 1:30 a.m. Truck drivers warned each other over radio channels, and even delivery drivers refused late-night routes to that location, claiming the place felt wrong, like the building was listening. For years, employees reported strange incidents that were always dismissed as equipment failure. The drive-through screen turning on without a vehicle present, the order bell ringing once and stopping, the receipt printer producing long empty slips at exactly 2 a.m., and security cameras rotating on their own, slowly tracking invisible movement. No one ever stayed long enough on the night shift to officially complain, because most either quit quietly or simply never came back after a certain night. This was the place where Jake Miller, a 19-year-old community college student, took a job he thought would solve his money problems, but instead introduced him to a rule that made his stomach sink the moment he heard it. Jake had moved to Ravenwood only 3 months earlier, far from his family, struggling to balance classes, rent, and student debt, and when he saw the night shift needed higher pay sign in the McDonald's window, he didn't hesitate. The interview was brief. The manager seemed exhausted rather than strict, and the job sounded simple enough: cleaning, restocking, and handling the occasional late-night order. On Jake's first shift, he noticed details that didn't feel right but brushed them off. There were no clocks visible except the digital one above the drive-thru monitor. The back hallway lights flickered even though the wiring was supposedly new, and the freezer door looked far older than the rest of the kitchen, its metal surface deeply scratched, dented, and stained in places where the paint had been worn away by what looked disturbingly like fingernail marks. The other employees avoided standing near it, never leaned against it, and always made sure it was fully closed before walking away, as if leaving it slightly open was dangerous. Jake asked one co-worker why everyone seemed so tense, but she only told him to just follow the rules and quickly change the subject. As midnight passed, customers disappeared completely, leaving the restaurant unnaturally silent except for the hum of machines and the low buzz of fluorescent lights. By 1 a.m., only Jake and the night manager remained, a man named Carl who looked like he hadn't slept properly in years, his face pale, his eyes constantly darting toward the drive-thru screen. At 1:45 a.m., Carl handed Jake a laminated sheet titled Night Shift Guidelines, but one rule wasn't printed. It was written to bottom in red marker, as if added later by someone desperate. Carl hesitated before explaining it, lowering his voice even though the restaurant was empty, and said that this rule was the reason the position paid more. He told Jake that after exactly 2 a.m., if the drive-thru screen activated and displayed a Happy Meal order, Jake was not allowed to speak into the microphone, ask questions, or prepare food. Instead, he had to print the receipt, fold it once, slide it under the counter, and step away until the screen turned off on its own. Jake laughed awkwardly, assuming it was some kind of joke or hazing ritual, but Carl did not smile. He leaned closer and said, "I'm serious. The last kid who asked what toy they wanted didn't finish his shift." When Jake asked what happened to him, Carl simply replied that the employee stopped existing in the system. No termination record, no resignation, no missing person report, just erased, as if he had never worked there at all. As the digital clock above the drive-thru ticked closer to 2 a.m., the temperature in the restaurant felt colder, the hum of the freezer grew louder, and Jake found himself staring at the dark drive-thru screen outside, illuminated only by the parking lot lights. He told himself it was just stress, just an old building with faulty electronics, but deep down, a heavy sense of dread settled into his chest, because part of him already knew that this McDonald's wasn't just open all night for customers. It was open for something else, something that came to place orders when the world was supposed to be asleep. As the digital clock above the drive-thru flipped from 1:59 a.m. to 2 a.m., the entire McDonald's seemed to react, as if the building itself had been waiting for that moment. Because the fluorescent lights dimmed slightly, the fryer alarm stopped beeping, and the steady hum of the freezer deepened into a low mechanical growl that vibrated to the floor and into Jake's chest. Carl stepped away from the counter without saying another word, retreating into the back office and closing the door behind him, leaving Jake alone in the front area with the drive-through screen glowing faintly outside like a single open eye in the dark parking lot. For several minutes, nothing happened, and Jake began to feel foolish for letting his fear get the better of him, telling himself that this was exactly how rumors survived: ordinary noises, late-night exhaustion, and an overactive imagination feeding off silence. He wiped the counter, checked the soda machine, and avoided looking directly at the freezer door, which now seemed louder than before, as if something inside was shifting its weight. At 2:17 a.m., the drive-through bell rang once, sharp and sudden, echoing through the empty restaurant, and Jake froze with his hand hovering above the register. The screen lit up slowly, pixel by pixel, until two words appeared in white letters against the black background: Happy Meal. There was no car outside, no headlights, no engine noise, just a glowing screen and the faint reflection of Jake's own face staring back at him, pale and tense. Remembering Carl's warning, Jake swallowed hard and reached for the receipt printer without speaking, but the moment his fingers touched the button, an intense wave of unease washed over him, as if he were doing something irreversible. The printer whirred to life, but instead of printing a normal receipt, it spat out a long strip of paper completely blank except for a greasy stain near the bottom shaped disturbingly like a small handprint. Jake folded it once, just as instructed, slid it under the counter, and stepped back, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure it could be heard through the walls. For a few seconds, nothing happened, and then the drive-through screen went dark as abruptly as it had turned on. Jake exhaled shakily, convinced it was over, but that relief lasted only a moment, because the freezer door creaked, not opening fully, but moving just enough to release a blast of freezing air that smelled faintly of old paper and metal rather than food. From inside the freezer came a soft sound, at first so quiet Jake thought he imagined it, followed by another and another, until he realized it was laughter, high-pitched and childlike, echoing unnaturally as if bouncing off walls that were far too large for the space they were in. Jake backed away, nearly slipping on the tiled floor, his mind racing for a rational explanation, telling himself it had to be a recording, a prank, something mechanical, anything but what it felt like. His phone vibrated in his pocket, making him flinch, and when he pulled it out, he saw a notification from an unknown number with no contact name, no area code, just a single message that read, "You were supposed to stay quiet." Jake's fingers trembled as another message appeared almost instantly beneath it. "They don't like questions." Before he could react, the security monitors behind the counter flickered on, one by one, even though he hadn't touched them, and the camera feed shifted automatically, slowly rotating until every screen was focused on the freezer door from different angles. The laughter grew louder, overlapping in strange rhythms, some voices giggling, others whispering words Jake couldn't understand. And then the freezer door opened wider, inch by inch, the metal hinges screaming in protest as if trying to warn him. Jake screamed for Carl, pounding on the office door, but there was no answer, only the steady glow of the exit sign and the growing certainty that he was completely alone. The phone vibrated again, this time with a photo attachment, and when Jake opened it, his blood ran cold. On the screen was an image of the McDonald's freezer interior, taken from inside, looking out, with Jake standing frozen in the frame, his back turned, completely unaware he had been photographed. The message beneath it read, "Your turn." Panic took over, and Jake ran toward the front door, but the automatic lock refused to disengage, flashing red no matter how hard he pulled, while the drive-through screen outside lit up again, displaying the same two words, brighter than before, "Happy Meal." The laughter stopped suddenly, replaced by silence so complete it hurt his ears, and then a new sound emerged from the freezer. Not laughter this time, but slow footsteps, small but deliberate, approaching the door from the inside. Jake backed up until his shoulders hit the counter, his breath coming in sharp gasps, his mind screaming at him to move, to do something, but his body refused to obey as the freezer door opened fully at last, revealing only darkness inside, deeper than it should have been, stretching impossibly far back, as if the freezer led somewhere that wasn't part of the restaurant at all. From that darkness, a small voice whispered his name, perfectly clear, spoken in the tone of someone who knew him well, and as Jake felt an icy hand wrap around his wrist, dragging him forward, the drive-thru printer activated one final time, printing a single receipt with one line of text at the top. Order accepted. The moment the icy grip tightened around Jake's wrist, the world seemed to tilt, the bright fluorescent lights of the McDonald's stretching and warping above him as if the building itself were bending inward. And before he could scream again, he was pulled forward with unnatural strength, his shoes scraping uselessly against the tile as the freezer's darkness swallowed him whole. The temperature dropped instantly, not just cold but painfully empty, like the absence of heat rather than its opposite, and the sound of the restaurant vanished behind him, replaced by a deep, echoing silence broken only by distant mechanical hums that no longer sounded like machines but like breathing. Jake thrashed and kicked, but the hand dragging him forward felt small and impossibly strong, its fingers digging into his skin with numbing pressure, until suddenly he was released and collapsed onto a hard surface that felt like frozen concrete. As his eyes adjusted, he realized the freezer was far larger inside than it ever appeared from the outside, stretching into a vast corridor lined with endless metal shelves stacked not with food, but with hundreds of Happy Meal boxes, each one old, faded, and labeled in black marker with names and dates. Jake's chest tightened as he forced himself to stand, reading the names closest to him, and his blood turned to ice when he recognized them. Not strangers, but former employees whose names he remembered from old schedules pinned in the break room, people Carl had once mentioned in passing before quickly changing the subject. Before Jake could process what he was seeing, the laughter returned, but this time it was softer, closer, surrounding him, and from between the shelves stepped figures that looked like children only at first glance, their bodies slightly too thin, their movements jerky and unnatural, their faces frozen and wide, forced smiles that never reached their eyes. Their uniforms were wrong. Tiny McDonald's shirts stained with frost and grease, name tags scratched so deeply the names were unreadable, and as they drew closer, Jake realized with horror that these were not children at all, but something wearing the idea of them like a costume. One of them stepped forward and spoke in a voice layered with many others, explaining calmly that the McDonald's was never meant to close, because long ago, when the restaurant was first built, something old and hungry had been buried beneath the foundation, something that learned quickly that people would come willingly if food and light were offered in the darkness. Over time, the thing learned rules, learned patterns, learned that children were comforting, disarming, and that Happy Meals, bright, cheerful, familiar, with a perfect disguise for taking what it needed to survive. Jake stumbled backward as the shelves behind him shifted, rearranging themselves with metallic screams, and he realized there was no exit, no door back to the kitchen, only deeper darkness and more boxes stretching endlessly in every direction. The figure circled him slowly, explaining that every rule Jake had been told was not for safety but for balance, because the thing beneath the building demanded offerings, and employees who broke the rules disrupted the cycle, forcing it to take more than planned. Jake shouted that people would notice he was gone, that the police would come, that the restaurant would shut down, but the figures laughed softly, telling him that it had happened before many times, and that the system always corrected itself. Files deleted, cameras malfunctioning, memories fading. Because in a town like Ravenwood, people preferred explanations that let them sleep at night. As the figures reached for him, the world lurched again, and suddenly Jake found himself standing behind the McDonald's counter, his heart racing, his hands empty, the restaurant perfectly normal and brightly lit, as if nothing had happened at all. The digital clock read 6:58 a.m. The morning shift employees were arriving, and Carl was standing nearby, pale and shaking, refusing to meet Jake's eyes. Jake tried to speak, to scream, to run, but his body moved without his permission, tying his apron, wiping the counter, smiling when a customer approached, and it was then that he saw his reflection in the stainless steel, his eyes dull, his smile slightly too wide, his name tag scratched and unreadable. Panic surged through him as he realized he was trapped, not dead, not alive, but something in between, bound to the restaurant like all the others whose names filled the freezer shelves. Days passed, or maybe minutes. It was impossible to tell, and Jake watched helplessly as new employees came and went, each one receiving the same warning, each one laughing it off just like he had. Late one night, Long after Jake had stopped trying to fight the control, the drive-thru screen flickered on by itself at exactly 2 a.m., and the familiar words appeared once again. Happy Meal. Jake felt his mouth open, his voice speaking without his consent, calm and rehearsed, repeating the same instruction Carl had once given him, warning the new employee not to ask questions. Somewhere deep beneath the floor, the thing beneath the McDonald's stirred, satisfied, as the receipt printer began to whir, and another name was quietly added to the growing collection, while the restaurant's golden arches glowed warmly against the night sky, inviting the next hungry soul inside.